And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Wednesday, October 2nd. We have a lot to cover on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to go to the Super Chat button in the chat. This will help create a super chat of any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast that you want to see me acknowledge. It makes the show more lively, more entertaining between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. We appreciate your guys' viewership each and every day, so any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So we're going to start off the show. We're going to talk about Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams requesting a trade. So we'll talk about that situation and, some of the possible destinations for him if he is indeed traded. Then in the second part of the show, we'll continue recapping the games from this past weekend. We'll talk about the Steelers-Colts game. So Anthony Richardson got hurt in the game and Joe Flacco came in for relief for him, and we'll talk about Joe Flacco's performance as well. Then we'll also get into talking about the Bengals picking up their first win of the season, defeating the Panthers 34-24 against the former Bengal quarterback Andy Dalton. Then in the fourth part of the show, we'll get into talking about the 49ers bouncing back after a 2-game losing streak, defeating the Patriots. And then in the final part of the show, I will give you my top 5 teams after week 4 in the NFL. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about Davante Adams and him requesting a trade from the Raiders. So this is something that's kind of been in the news a lot. I mean, in the offseason, there was a lot of speculation on that, but it was made official. And, things have kind of been brewing in Vegas that's kind of led to this point. And to kind of go through the situation. So, Davante Adams requested a trade. Now, what was interesting is something regarding the head coach, Antonio Pierce. So, supposedly, he liked an Instagram post suggesting Adams may have played his last snap with the Raiders. And, according to Ian Rappaport, Davante Adams preferred to be traded, and the Raiders are growing open to the idea of trading Adams and are reportedly reaching out to gauge interest. Adam Schefter reports the Raiders are seeking a package that includes a second-round pick and additional compensation. Because, Davante Adams, I know the production the last, couple years hasn't been up to, Davante Adams' standards, but part of that, I think, is because of the inconsistencies with the quarterback play. I mean, we saw what he could do with Derek Carr in 2022. And last year you had Jimmy Garoppolo, you had Aiden O'Connell. This year you got Gardner Minshew. And although I don't think Minshew is bad, I don't think Minshew is a franchise quarterback, but I would like to see Davante Adams be put with someone that, with a playoff contender, with a quarterback that is more established. And so again, Antonio Pierce, he liked a Sports Illustrated post on Instagram, more specifically stating that Adams, like I said, may have already played his last snap with the Raiders. And screenshots of Pierce's like were shared on social media, and supposedly Adams hasn't really communicated with Antonio Pierce. Because you would think if Pierce did that by accident, and I think this was brought up in the interview with Kay Adams, you would think Antonio Pierce would have reached out to Davante Adams and say, hey, that's my bad, I didn't mean to do that. But apparently there's been no communication between the two sides, at least from what I understand. So, and then you go back to what Antonio Pierce said after the loss to the Panthers, him talking about players making business decisions. Does that mean Davante Adams fell in that category? I mean, it looks like it. I mean, you don't want to, say that's definitive, but it seems like that's who he was talking about. I mean, there were guys on the defense that Antonio Pierce may have been alluding to, but it seems like Davante Adams was falling into that category. And yeah, I mean, right now the Raiders, they're 2-2. I mean, it's not like they're out of it by any means, but is this team going to do anything this year? I don't think so. I mean, I didn't have them making the playoffs. I had them around 8 wins. But again, until they get that franchise quarterback, they're not really going to be doing anything. And it's interesting because in another aspect, you look at this, Davante Adams was one of the main advocates to bring back Antonio Pierce. Max Crosby even, threatened to request a trade on his end to, if the Raiders didn't want to bring him back or ended up not bringing him back. And the Raiders ended up bringing Antonio Pierce back. And now it seems like Davante Adams is on his way out. So I thought that was also interesting too, that he was one of the main he was one of the main people that spoke up and said, hey, I want him back. And they got him back, and now he might be going somewhere else. So now in terms of where Davante Adams should go, I mean, there's plenty of teams out there that need wide receiver help. I know the Chiefs are a topic of conversation when it comes to that, with the injuries that they're dealing with right now, Marquise Brown and most recently Rashee Rice. But it's hard for me to believe that the Raiders would trade him within the division, unless, the Chiefs have the compensation, which they definitely do. But would the Raiders be willing to trade him within the division? And I know that a bunch of NFL fans are out there saying that they want every team to conspire against the Chiefs, even if the Chiefs call and give them a package that they can't refuse. They want the Raiders to just hang up on them and not help them out. But the Chiefs might be focusing on Amari Cooper. That's a name to keep an eye on from what I've seen. But there is a team, and I brought this up, I think, right before the season started. I definitely brought it up. Actually, no, I think it was after the opener against the Chiefs. It was the Ravens. The Ravens are a team that needs wide receiver help. And I think Davante Adams, that would be a good fit. And, that would make the Ravens offense even better because, you got Derrick Henry who's running the football well these last couple of weeks. You got Lamar Jackson who could throw it and run it if he has to. But to give Lamar Jackson that number one wide receiver, easily the best receiver he's ever played with, if they were to get Davante Adams, that would just make this team even better. So I don't know how they would. We'll see if they would be able to make it work. But that's, I think, a good destination for him. I know we mentioned the Chiefs, but again, I don't know if the Raiders are going to trade him within the division, but who knows? You also have the Jets. The Jets are a team that's been linked to Adams for a while now. They tried to trade for him last year. They've been trying, and I mean, listen, if I get to see Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams pair up again one last time, I mean, sign me up for it. Because I said, when Davante Adams was with Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams was the best receiver in the NFL. And, since then, with what's happened the last couple of years, the production has gone down. This guy still has good years left. Some very good years left. And, I think he instantly helps out the Jets, gives them another threat. The problem is, and we talked about the Jets yesterday, coaching is ultimately what's going to hold them back. So, yeah, you could bring in Davante Adams, and that may look great, but you still got Robert Saleh as the head coach and Nathaniel Hackett as the offensive coordinator. And the defense is still a little bit of an issue. So, but it at least helps Aaron Rodgers. And, he's trying to get on the same page as Garrett Wilson. And, that would take pressure off of Garrett Wilson. Because then Garrett Wilson can slide in as that 1A number 2 or 1B number 2 receiver. And, then more of the attention goes on Davante Adams. That helps out Garrett Wilson. So, and Allen Lazard has played well this year for them. Mike Williams is kind of like that fourth receiver. That would be good for the Jets. Would they be able to make it work? We'd have to wait and see. Also, another team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I know Steeler fans, they kind of, at least from what I've seen on social media, are a little upset that they traded Deontay Johnson because they could definitely use him. Calvin Austin, has made plays for them. George Pickens, is the number one wide receiver. Pat Freiermuth, we'll talk about, the Steelers in the next segment. Pat Freiermuth had a touchdown in the game on Sunday. But the Steelers need wide receiver help. That's why they tried to go out and get Brandon Ayuk, and they weren't able to do that. Davante Adams had helped them out. Look at how Justin Fields has played so far this year. The Steelers may have lost, and you put the blame on the defense, which, again, we'll get into it in the next segment. But Justin Fields played well. Passed for over 300 yards. Looked good. He has looked good so far this year. That was probably his best game. There was a turnover. There was a fumble, I believe, but played well. So, you get Davante Adams in there, that elevates that offense. Because they are lacking at the receiver position. But, yeah, it does seem like Davante Adams is going to get traded, but where is he going to get traded is the question. I would say it's either going to come down to, I'm going to say it's either going to be the Ravens or the Jets. I didn't even mention an NFC team. I mean, I would love to see him go back to Green Bay and play with Jordan Love, but I don't know if they necessarily need him. They got a lot of young receivers there that are playing well. Jaden Reed has gotten off to a good start. Dontavian Wicks had a big game as well. Christian Watson's going to miss some time, and you got Romeo Doubs. So, they're kind of set at receiver, but, I mean, if you bring in Davante Adams, that only makes your team even better. I mean, any team that adds Davante Adams makes your team better. But definitely wants to go to a contender. And I think I would lean towards the Ravens. But, we'll see what happens. But let me know what you guys think about this whole situation. Let me know in the comments. My prediction is he's going to end up as a Raven. That's my prediction. Might be wrong, but my top two are the Ravens and the Jets. So, all right. So with that being said, we're going to take our first break, and then when we come back, we will discuss the Steelers-Colts game. We'll talk about Anthony Richardson and his injury, and Joe Flacco coming in relief for him, and what Joe Flacco was able to do to help the Colts defeat the Steelers 27-24. So, we'll be right back. We're going to take a break now, so stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.